everyone, welcome to Life Unpotted. This is Daisy, and today we want to talk about this topic of pressure, and that's our jumping off point. It seems as though pressure can make us start to work against ourselves. I don't know if this is a familiar feeling where, say, you have a deadline that you have to meet and you have to finish something by a certain time and get it turned in. And all of a sudden, all the clarity, all the creativity, all the excitement you might have goes out the window. And instead, you fixate on all of the reasons why you're not going to do a good job on this, all of the reasons why there isn't enough time, all of the reasons why maybe your life sucks, or maybe all of the reasons why you should just give up, and all of the reasons like you should just move home and never, the list goes on. And I think it's really easy to let that dictate our lives, or let that become a habit where we start to see one thing that doesn't go planned, that, we're doing this a little bit last minute, or we're getting to a spot where this is not what I planned to happen. I can't make something happen. And I think what ultimately this comes down to is a trust in yourself and an ability to separate that from your thoughts. And this is an active thing I'm trying to work through, and I'm trying to understand for myself of, do we have to work against ourselves? Is it something that we have to do if we feel like things aren't going right? Can we pause and put things into perspective and understand that most of our life isn't going to go quote unquote right? That this could be a momentary experience that we're having, and that we should just accept this experience for exactly what it is, instead of projecting it onto our entire life, or if we're creating something, what we're creating, or our work or our career or family or whatever it may be. Can we just look at it for what it is in the moment, instead of thinking maybe my whole life is going the wrong direction?
Yeah. I have so many memories of pressure, putting pressure on myself. Like, vividly remember being a kid and math homework. That was like the first time I have a memory of just being, I don't know how to do this homework. I hate this. I don't know how to do it. Getting really angry at myself, getting really mad at everyone in my family, just like isolating myself. And I think for me, school was really where that pressure was ingrained, of going to high school that was preparing me for college, and really intense homework and intense reading requirements. And there was a lot of stress. Like, I have to get a good grade because I have to get a good college, and everyone around me in school is going to a good college, and everyone's smarter than me. And then it's like that. It's interesting, like recently I've been reflecting on how a lot of my life I've spent very intellectual up here. And that's great. Thinking about things is great, and trying to understand things is great. But it got to the point where I didn't know who I was, or I didn't really have a sense of my value if it wasn't coming from my performance or how well something was. And I've seen this even going and creating the podcast and leaving law and switching from the corporate world into a more creative self-expression field. You're met with the same challenges of, why is this not good enough? And then judging myself, or being mad I didn't do something on time. And it's like getting so mad at myself for no reason. And I just think that, for me, the big reflection point is that it feels like in those moments I'm so angry because I think that my performance, my ability to perform at work and to build a business and do all these things is my main source of value. And I will have to mention, we live in a world where you do have to make money. And you do have to provide for yourself, and you do have to find financial means to support this life. That's all really real. But we don't have to hate ourselves, and we don't have to judge ourselves and get so frustrated by little mistakes along the way. That all is optional. And sometimes when I hear that, I'm like, what are you talking about? Because I'm pissed off right now, and I'm annoyed, and I'm frustrated. Not right now. We're just in those moments of but I need this to be perfect.
It's really easy to blow things out of proportion. And this is where you can look at it from one perspective and say, oh, I messed up. I messed something up. There's going to be some consequences, and I'm not looking forward to that. And that's it. Or on the other end, there's the component of making a mistake and letting it ruin your entire day. It letting you go home from work or wherever this experience happened and not see your partner, not see your roommates, not see people that love you. It can get so blown out of proportion that you think the punishment or the consequence itself isn't enough. It's that you want to take it into your own hands and you want to continuously beat yourself up. And what a novel idea it is to realize you don't have to do that. To realize, right, I'm human. The expectation isn't that I'm perfect. It isn't that I should never make mistakes. It's that, right, oh, I learned from my mistakes. Well, if we're over there putting so much pressure on ourselves and blowing things out of proportion, well, we're not going to have the capacity to learn from our mistakes because we're going to instead be beating ourselves up and having anxiety and being overwhelmed and just making ourselves suffer.
And again, like on this podcast, we talk so much about our internal world and how it's never the external circumstance that is causing you to experience an emotion. It's the associations that we create with our minds and attach to external stimuli. From a very broadened perspective, everything in reality is empty. So it can be really confusing sometimes to know that the way you're responding is not the only way. And that's really, really hard for me a lot of the time when realizing that pressure of have to record the podcast, haven't recorded it, need to upload it, it's 1 a.m., what's going on? And when you just said disproportionate reactions, that really got me thinking because it's like, that is it. It's like one experience happens and it feels like your life's over. It literally feels like your life's over in that moment. And what we don't recognize is that it was just one moment that came and will leave. Everything in life arises and it flows and it comes in and it goes out. To the point of our breath, it goes into our body and it leaves our body. It's a constant circulation in this experience called life, but our human mind, this human experience, biologically, whatever reason, this brain wants us to, probably evolutionary or trauma or experiences from childhood, or really all the stories we believed about the fact that we need to suffer. And it's just becoming really clear to me more than ever, like now that it's almost, I think it is a full year since leaving our jobs. And it was really eye-opening for me to leave my job and to leave my career rather, and then find myself with all of the same problems, all of the same pressure, all of the same anxiety, and just like how that impedes on tapping into this universal intelligence and universal creativity that's always available for us to tap into. It impedes on growing and watering our flowers in the garden of life, but instead we're ripping up the flowers and getting pissed off that I should have planted that the other way. It's just like, it's exhausting, like, to live that way.
Well, it's like pain and suffering are inevitable in life, but we can 10x that real quick. We can beat ourselves up and make things worse on ourselves. And I think what you said about leaving a high pressured career behind to move into creating content and all this journey that we're on now was that you found the same problems to be true. And I think that is really fascinating because it's so easy to scapegoat and blame everything around us as for why we're miserable, or I fucked that project up, or I didn't get this out on time, or I didn't add a period where I was supposed to add a period for this last thing that got sent out to a client. It really shows that when you made those mistakes, I'm sure there was external consequences that were high stakes, high pressure oriented. I'm sure that was there with the career profession you were in. But it makes me wonder about, how did you perceive those for yourself? Is that inner critic or is that inner judge still very much alive? And has it always been alive? Has that always been a part of you? But you only were able to notice that when you started writing a newsletter, or you started sitting down with me, your girlfriend, a podcast, that all of these things, all of these emotions, all of these feelings that were generally stored away for work. Well, they got brought into other parts of your life. And suddenly it's not a partner calling you to tell you that they need you to work at 8 a.m. on a Saturday. It's you putting that pressure on yourself to send out an email or a newsletter or do a podcast a certain way or have a certain expectation. Suddenly it's like the mask is pulled, and what you see is that it's just the pressure you put on yourself. And I really resonate with this because it's so easy to never think it's you. It's so easy to think, oh, it's because I was in a certain job, or it's because I had a certain boss, or it was all of these things that were outside of you. But what I am learning is that you can take accountability for it. We have warmed up for this podcast like 6 times. And in the past, Sophie and I, there would have been a different outcome. Like, we've been very amicable. We've been just warming up, trying to work it out, trying to get to the right statement, the right experience, the right topic that we want to talk about. In the past, it would have suddenly became so many different things where it was a fight, or it was an argument, or it was a don't look at me that way, or why'd you look at me? And all of a sudden we've created this problem, and we've taken maybe the discomfort of not knowing where we're going as a way to not trust ourselves. So we sabotage because we don't trust that we can figure it out. But what I learned through this experience was that we didn't sabotage, and clearly we've gotten to a place where we're engaged. We're having a topic of conversation that's interesting to me. And this is all because I decided to trust myself, and you decided to trust yourself and to not sabotage yourself. But taking this back to the career, it's way more difficult to take accountability in that instance as well, because you think it's like all for someone else. Meaning, in this moment, there's no one telling you. You could walk away and you could say, fuck it. And you could blame that it was the podcast. The podcast was too hard. But through working through it, and I'm sure maybe you did have this at your career as well, by working through it, not out of a state of anxiety, but out of a state of trust, you're able to see that, no, this is just me and my ability to have trust and resilience within myself. It's to keep going to find out what will happen. So I think the pressure we put on ourselves can masquerade itself in a lot of different ways. But ultimately, it's like we have to just keep going in order to find out what it is we're capable of, and to shatter all of the stories that are told to us as we're under our own pressure.
A lot of what I'm thinking about in response to that is just kind of how, like, you get thrown into, from childhood to a work environment. And a lot of the time, I mean, I was going to say nobody prepares you for those experiences, but then I was kind of thinking, well, nobody can prepare you for an experience. Like, we can say what it's going to be. You can say, okay, working's going to be X, Y, Z, but especially if you're dealing with people who are not self-aware, because they're going to project their own misery of, oh, working sucks, or it has to be like this, or you better stress about that. And when you get thrown into an experience and you don't give yourself the time to reflect about it, or to have the awareness that maybe what you're experiencing was really hard. Like, for me, I remember being at my first law firm job and vividly remember them being like, you're going to get thrown into the fire. You have to do a residential real estate closing on your own because this partner can't go. And I was dealing with a client who was really, really aggressive, and she was pissed off, and she wanted and just like a lot of these clients when they're buying homes, some are really, really pleasant, but some were just fucking mad. And her looking to me as her lawyer, like, that is a really big responsibility that I had for people of their life was dependent on my work, and they're about to purchase $1 million home, and I'm about to close a deal, and I have to make sure all the tax documents are right. I have to make sure this closing goes smoothly. And I think I internalized a lot of that pressure, and not really having a time within my career during the time I was a lawyer to reflect. because, I just got through it all and I learned, and getting thrown into the fire can be really helpful. But I think the point I'm trying to say, if you don't have that post-reflection at some point, you will internalize that experience, and that will become your base state of, this is how I get work done. This is how I am productive. This is how I accomplish things. Because I don't think I ever learned that, or rather, the way I learned to work and to get good grades and to make money came from pressure on myself. Because I guess I didn't know how to trust myself that I would do well, like studying for a law school exam. There's like the added pressure, but not realizing that like they're not really correlated necessarily. Like if you remove that pressure, what would come down is you're still reading the book, you're still learning, you're still processing, our minds can still do all these things, but we almost attribute, oh, I did really well because I put all that pressure on myself. So maybe that's why now I think that if I didn't send out the community Zoom link, I'm so stressed about it. It's like that same pressure gets applied, and then you never really have a chance, and I never really had a chance to break it until podcasting, where I'm like, wait a minute, I love this. Why am I sabotaging this? And I think that's why people probably say you can't do what you're passionate about for work. And I think what they're really saying is you will ruin what you're passionate about because you won't look at all of the pressure and stress that you're projecting now onto a new thing in your life. You'll ruin everything, and you'll never be content at that point. You'll constantly be in the misery for eternity. Big reflection right now for me.
Well, I guess there's different types of pressure. There's the inevitable pressure of life. There's the pressures of financial responsibilities. There's the pressure of familiar responsibilities. There's the pressure of responsibilities of taking care of your health. Like there's just external pressures. Like you don't pay your rent, like your landlord's going to come knocking on your door. Like there's certain pressures that remain there to ensure that something gets done correctly. Like that's kind of the fabric of society of like, right, there's pressure to do something, because if there's no pressure, like I think of like a pressure cooker that's putting, I guess, quote unquote, pressure onto food, and it's cooking it fast because it's high pressure. So it makes me wonder if what pressure is just to ensure that something is completed. If external pressure is different than internal pressure. Because for me, if I were to define what internal pressure is, it's like, oh, you've done something wrong. You're working out of fear. You have to get this done or else you're going to die. Like extreme statement, but like kind of a fight or flight response is my internal response to pressure. So it's really questioning your relationship to pressure. Just because there is an experience that is full of pressure doesn't mean that has to be your internal response to pressure. You don't have to create more pressure for yourself. And I think these are the kinds of realizations that happen after you've had your fair share of experience with pressure. Because of course, if you're, like you said, Sophie, like if you're thrown into it, like most people are when they start a job, post-college or post-grad, whatever it may be, you don't know anything. So you do create your own experience to pressure. And you are scared because it is scary because you don't know anything. Because not knowing is really scary. And you're starting over in a new world where everyone knows something and you don't. And, oh, if you mess this up, what's going to happen? It's like, it's the process of learning. So I think taking a step back and reevaluating your relationship to pressure can help you perform better under pressure. Because just because there is an external pressure doesn't mean that, again, you have to create that internal pressure for yourself. And I think that's a skill that you have to learn.
Yeah, I think it's a skill that comes with life experience and reflection. Because it's like, yes, there are external forces in life, in reality, that impose certain responsibilities onto us. So if you're at a job, you have a manager who says, I need this by Friday. But what I see in my own experience is that the disconnect between, and you said the word perception earlier, so the disconnect between the external pressure or the external statement of I need this by Friday, and then my response to that to be, oh shit, I have to read this loan agreement by Friday and mark it up, all of a sudden the thoughts start going of, I'm not going to be able to do that. How am I going to do that? And it's interesting because it's like we always say, and I think my opinion on life and reality is that every experience that we have is internal because it's through our mind. So it's like, it's important to question what are the beliefs that you have about yourself and about what the situation is happening and what the person is telling you and what you go on to then internalize that means. It's like your perception of the external pressure is what makes it so much worse, because it's no longer just, I need this by Friday. It's, I need this by Friday, plus all these stories I'm not going to create about why it's going to be a huge problem to do that. It's not the actual experience. It's all this shit that we put on from our mind of, now I have to worry about this. It's thoughts. It's living in the mind. And I think it's interesting to think about going back to my job and being more self-aware and being more mindful and also zooming out and understanding mortality and understanding that there's existence in the universe and this experience in my human body that will one day no longer be here. And then there's also life as we know it, and having the ability to like zoom out while kind of like Alan Watts says, you're the bus driver and you're just playing. Like, don't take any of it too seriously, because you know that no matter what happens, you'll be able to handle it and it'll be fine.
Well, I think perspective is what really helps build that ability to see that, because when you are thrust into a new experience for the first time, you might just be projecting your own anxiety and fear because you're learning to manage that amidst other people's maybe anxiety and fear that they're holding from telling you, I need this from this date. Or maybe it's self-created from you and your relationship to deadlines or stressful experiences or tones of voice or pace of environment. It's interesting to hear you reflect on your experience and your relationship to pressure within your career as being a lawyer, because I reflect on my experience of just working different jobs within agencies or within startups. And my relationship to pressure was always, you can't do that. You're not going to be able to do that, because I was always in a fight or flight state. So it just makes me think of when we don't have awareness of what our physical and mental state is, when we don't know what that is, when we're not aware of maybe, oh, like I get really stressed or I get really anxious. If we aren't aware of those things and we go into the work environment and there's these rules and guidelines and regulations on when things need to be finished, and there's dynamics and there's pushback and there's all of these things that happen that maybe are stressful to one person and not another. But if you aren't aware of your own personal baggage, your own relationship to social dynamics or to pressure or to working, well, that's not going to be a very smooth transition, is it? Maybe for some people more than others, but I look back and I reflect, and I was in such an anxious state that any task felt extremely difficult. And I say that with empathy towards myself or towards people who are going into a work environment with high stakes or pressures that are external, when your day-to-day experience that you put on yourself is high stakes pressure on the internal part of you. And I mean that if you just have that level of intensity or put a lot of pressure on yourself, well, maybe that makes for some people to be very high performing because they can't mess up. I think also it has the potential for you to crumble, where you can have such high stakes pressure on yourself that you're met with like low stakes pressure. And it's as if you are in a courtroom because it's your internal relationship to it. So I guess at the end of the day, it feels like your relationship internally to pressure is what matters more than anything else, because you're going to be able to weather external high pressure if you have a realistic, grounded relationship to your own internal pressure. Because I think it's an important question I've never been asked or asked myself of what's your internal relationship to pressure, and to be really honest with yourself about that.
Because if we're really honest with ourselves, we can develop and cultivate the space to realize we don't have to work in that manner. And I'm really determined to, as we're continuing to build out Life Unpotted and this brand and working on new projects, to continue to do that in a relaxed manner and allowing myself to really, quote unquote, work, meaning to create, without having to bring in all that baggage and all of that weight of my life is dependent on this. And if I make one mistake, it's over. And look, the reality of it is there's a lot of careers and a lot of jobs and a lot of interactions where, let's just say you do get fired for one experience. I mean, that kind of sounds, I've never had that happen to me or heard of that. But you hear of like layoffs happen at big tech companies, and all of a sudden like 1,000 people are gone just like that. And I'm sure in those situations, it's really easy to internalize that you did something wrong and that you fucked up. You're a fucked up person. You'll never be good enough. You'll never excel. And it's just like that. Even if you did make a mistake, like we're learning, we're growing. We have to give ourselves that space and compassion to understand that if we're constantly punching ourselves in the face as we're trying to learn and grow and evolve in our lives, it's counterintuitive and it's counterproductive. Because what I've seen in my life when I'm the most relaxed is when the most amount of wisdom and insight and efficiency comes out. It's when I'm able to work at my best when I'm the most relaxed. And maybe pressure has gotten me somewhere in the past, but it just it doesn't feel right anymore, because it feels like really what it was a fear of not being able to trust myself if I did relax. That if I wasn't trying so hard, that things would just work out. And what you see time and time again as you do relax, podcasting is a perfect example, it flows. Like the flow of reality and the flow of life isn't one that we have to get in the way of. And when we do, problems arise. So I really like this conversation. I think it's a really important reflection point for me personally. And I can imagine applicable to every human being who works. Because we could end up really hurting our body and our mind and our soul if we're not checking in with ourselves as we're building and as we're creating and as we're trying to grow in our careers.
And I think it's also important to note that you can internalize the need to put a lot of pressure on yourself in so many different ways. It doesn't have to be a career. It can be as a child. It can be as a teenager. It can be from any particular experience where we internalize this need to beat ourselves up in order to perform. And I really liked what you said, where no matter where you're at in your life, if something happens where you internalize you weren't good enough, that you should have been better, you put pressure on yourself to be better. It's like, right, like we're all just here living. We're all deserving to grow and to learn from our experiences where things didn't go as planned. Like that's kind of the point. It's not to blow things so out of proportion that we miss the chance to learn from our mistake. And that is a mistake I've made several times throughout my life. And I will say it's been healing to do this podcast from the pressure I know we were both facing a little bit with the deadline and the time, and having done it 6 times to figure out the right topic. And I'm really proud of both of us because we both kept our cool and we managed to talk about something that was interesting to us, that was meaningful to us, and not fall to our own pressures that we put on ourselves and self-sabotage. And that's truly what it is. It's just the pressure you put on yourself. That's where it begins. You can't control the pressure outside of you, but having the time to reflect on the pressure you put on yourself is going to better prepare you for any environment and any pressure that might come your way. So I think I have some reflection to do on my relationship to pressure. Man. Well, I really enjoyed this convo. I appreciated working with you on this one, Sophie. And I'm curious if you listeners do question your relationship to pressure. I would be really, 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 really interested and curious to hear from you all. I know we don't do the listener write-in questions, but if you ever did write in a question and you're still listening, or you didn't get the chance to and you want to just write in your experience with your relationship to pressure, I think it would be really cool just to read, but also it could be really cool to share. And it could be really validating to share other people's experience in relationship to pressure, because it's probably more relatable and it's not just you who has that relationship to pressure. So just throwing it out there, if you're interested, you can DM us at Life Unpotted on Instagram, a voice note or your thoughts.
Yeah, I think when we find out that other people also experience the intensity that they put on themselves, and you realize everyone around you, maybe at your office, your manager you think doesn't trust you or doesn't like you, you realize they're just really stressed and anxious. They're carrying a lot of that insecurity that you then internalize, or in your relationship or in life, just existing. I think it's really hard sometimes to find a way to exist in life without holding on to everything that's been happening throughout the day. So I think this conversation is just a reminder that whatever has happened up until this point in your life or today, you can let it go and just move on. Move forward. Take the time to reflect if you need to, but beating yourself up is not a prerequisite to growing and to evolving. It's just a mechanism to make your life hell, honestly. So recognizing that we're in control of that, we take the power back, because we're no longer attributing it to the situation and saying, I can't handle this. It's because X, Y, Z. It's saying, no, I can handle this because I trust myself to move forward regardless. So a great reminder, a great point of reflection. And I'm glad that I was getting really triggered in the beginning of like, but I watched it. I just watched it happen. And I was like, wait a minute, I don't need to do that. Keep going, one step in front of the other. And that's where growth is happening and where growth happens. So thank you, Daisy, for joining me on this conversation. I appreciate it.
And when you have that new relationship to pressure that's examined, let the external pressure do what it's meant to do and get things done. It can be fun. And I'm really going to reflect on this. And maybe we'll do another episode on this. I say that lightly. And this was a good episode. So thanks for joining. And we will talk to you next time.